that conversation. I don't mean to you who are listening to this, but so Proverbs, maybe to the one who might have this objection, I should say, but Proverbs 26:4, do not answer fools according to their folly, or you yourself will be just like them. Well, that sounds like just an open and shut case, except the next verse says, answer fools according to their folly, or they will be wise in their own eyes. And so, you're saying, well, which is it then? So it just seems that what the writer of Proverbs is saying is that there are sort of these categories of fools, and that there are fools and there are fools. Does that clear it up for you? That you sort of have to use a bit of discernment. And there are some people that opt on this path of folly away from God and get into all types of mischief and get into all types of crazy lifestyles and behavior. And some people are bound to persist in that. And some people can be rescued from it. And there takes a certain amount of discernment, but some can be rescued and others cannot. And if you are going to get caught, and you will find out early on, that if you're going to get caught in some type of a discussion with someone and it begins to escalate into some type of an argument, and you just realize this is going nowhere fast, this person is not being reasonable. They are just giving me a bunch of unreasonable acrimony. They're just venting on me. They are not even engaging me in a civil conversation. You need to disengage quickly before you lose all credibility. That's verse 4. You yourself will be just like them. However, there will be some times when, if you don't respond to them in an appropriate way, they'll walk away thinking, I knew that Christianity stuff was nothing. And I've been in that situation before. I've been in that situation in very public settings. I mentioned before I was teaching in a secular university for, I said 20 years, but more like 16 years. Actually, I'm still on the faculty, but just haven't been teaching the last 3-4 years. As you know, my position now, right, keeps me pretty busy. So, but I've had students just call me out. I don't go wearing a label. I'm a pastor. I don't go wearing this kind of Christian label. But, there is this thing, I don't know if you heard about it, but I think, what is it called? Google. And people can find out who you are. So, I've been called out on a lot of things. And if I don't respond, then it's very likely Christianity doesn't get a fair hearing or a fair defense. So, yeah, I can see where both of these verses fit together. So one last, apologetics is not used in the Bible. This is another kind of critique, but that's just not true. That's just flat out not true. You'd have to look at, the miracles of Moses. Certainly Exodus 4, 1-9 was used before Pharaoh apologetically. Elijah also, 1 Kings chapter 18 and the standoff at Mount Carmel. Jesus certainly, we mentioned Acts chapter 2, Peter speaking, used Jesus' miracles apologetically to demonstrate and let's say Jesus' identity for who he was, to validate Jesus' credibility, demonstrate who he is as the Messiah, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and so on. And certainly Paul reasoned with people about God's existence. For example, Acts chapter 17, remember at the Areopagus there in Athens, and so on. So it just is clearly not true. Now let me just, for a few moments here, talk about objections from outside the Bible. In other words, logic cannot tell us anything about God, for example. This whole notion about it really is some misconception about logic itself. I think is unfortunate. And as we said at the outset of the lecture, I won't spend a lot of time there. I could give you some quotes, but I think it's just an unfortunate misrepresentation of logic. That logic is somehow some type of trick, or some way to try to use some gimmick to manipulate language in some way to trick people. Logic is just it is just how language is ordered, and just the use of language is ordered and constructed in such a way to use patterns of thought and sentence structure and syntax and semantics, that is to say word meaning and so on, in order to organize thought in a sequential way so that we build propositions. So a proposition is simply a statement that is capable of being validated or dismissed. In other words, it's capable of being proven to be true or falsified. And when you put propositions then in a series, you are creating an argument of premises. And premises then build an argument in succession to a conclusion. It's that simple. These are what arguments do. That's just deploying logic. And there's good logic and there's poor logic. Now, some arguments are better than others. And so there's inductive and deductive, which are basically what most people use. Deductive is just solid, very solid logic, very simple, solid, supported by solid evidence, incontrovertible, where inductive, is more, we've got more evidence to support. We think it's more reasonable to argue this way or something. But still, it's the deployment of logic. And then a second, logic cannot prove the existence of anything. So, this may be true, but logic can show that the things are possible and impossible, and even whether something is probable or improbable. Logic, therefore, can point toward the existence of God or point toward the truth of Christianity, even if faith is required to finally embrace it. We can apply the same thinking to relationship. Logic can help us decide whether we are loved, but it cannot prove love. Love must be experienced. Apologetic helps us to bring people to a point where they can enter into a relationship with Christ. Part of the problem with this objection is that it depends on the definition of prove. Very few, if any, things in life can actually be proved conclusively through logic. Yet we live as if many things are true. For example, William Lane Craig, and I can't go into these in great depth, but he was in a debate, I think with Peter Atkins one time, the noted atheist. And here's Atkins holding up the scientific worldview, naturalistic worldview. And then I think William F. Buckley was moderating the debate. You can still Google this, but so Craig finally comes to the end, and he wasn't even planning to get this out, but he says, well, if you were to ask me in the debate, he says, I was going to just raise, basically 5 things that science can't prove. In other words, 5 things that the empirical approach, or this proof based to everything, that somehow science, just lives or dies by proofs, But there's 5 things that science can't prove, and one was logic or mathematics. Because science assumes mathematical proofs. It assumes logic. It assumes mathematics, but it can prove neither one. Science cannot prove metaphysical truths. You know, for example, in a noted debate many, many years before, where Bertrand Russell was posed this question, the noted atheist then: could the world have been created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age? Science couldn't disprove it. In other words, science looking at the world to say it's billions of years old, but then someone could come back and say, but what if it was actually created, but just created 5 minutes ago to look like it was billions of years old, but in reality it's only 5 minutes old? Could that also be true? And then your science is wrong. And of course Russell. So metaphysical truths. No, science can't prove those. Ethical beliefs. Science can't prove ethics or morality. Science can't measure rightness or wrongness. All outside the purview of science, yet we know such things as right and wrong exist. Aesthetic beliefs, things like beauty, love, things like this, it all exists, but science, outside the purview of science, beauty is an abstract property, cannot be analyzed by the scientific method. And then finally, science itself. Science cannot prove its own method. And then someone might come along, a third thing: no one is converted through apologetics. And yet C.S. Lewis wrote that nearly everyone I know has embraced Christianity in adult life and has been influenced by what seemed to him to be at least a probable argument for theism. And then testimonies of people like Frank Morrison and Augustine support this claim. It's one thing to argue that arguments cannot make a person believe, but quite another to argue that this fact that arguments have no part in the process of moving a person towards faith. In other words, or in the words, I'm in trouble today. In the words of J. Gresham Machen, this is a Greek scholar, maybe Princeton University. But because argument is insufficient, it does not follow that it is unnecessary. Read that again. But because argument is insufficient, it does not follow that it is unnecessary. What the Holy Spirit does in the new birth is not to make a person a Christian regardless of the evidence, but on the contrary, to clear away the mists from his eyes and enable him to attend to the evidence. You see, for us, we've got to put the evidence there. Put the evidence there. Pray the Holy Spirit will use it. Give that intellectual permission, that intellectual invitation to come ultimately to trust Christ. Let's leave it there.